Hello, cyber citizens. As Alicia said, my name is Matthew McKinley, and I am the Technical Product Marketing Manager here at Lancope. And today, we are going to go through the concept of internal host reputation, and then we will talk about how you can use that for combating advanced cyber threats. So let's go ahead and get started. From the standpoint of an agenda, this will give you an idea of what we're going to cover. So we're going to give a quick background on what IP reputation actually is, why it's important, and primarily what its use cases are currently. We're probably all familiar with this to some degree or another, but I'll give you a little bit of a background, or it'll kind of set the stage of the conversation. Then we'll talk about the concern index. Now, this is a Lancope-specific feature, but the concern index is one of the fundamental building blocks of internal host reputation. In fact, it's critical to it. Then we'll talk about the two sides of IP reputation. There's the external side, which we're probably all pretty familiar with, but then we'll talk about the internal side and some of the cool things you can do with that. And then we're going to talk about, most importantly, how you can use this type of thing to combat advanced cyber threats. And advanced cyber threats, these are the ones for which there are rarely signatures. There have been some pretty notable examples in the media here recently, so we'll go through that as well. And I've got one of the last slides has got a link to a PDF in there that's pretty good reading. So we'll get to that here in a few minutes. But let's talk about the background. What is IP reputation? It's a measure of how much you can trust or how much you shouldn't trust a particular IP address. Typically when we think of external IP reputation, this is a conversation that comes up when you talk about spam and botnets and other types of malicious activity. And the reputation for external IP addresses is compiled from many different types of technologies. But it gives, at a high level, when you incorporate threat feed information, external threat feed information like that into a security product, it gives you an idea of what types of things to watch out for. In the case of StealthWatch, we have an external threat feed that we incorporate into StealthWatch for use, for example, if a host on your interior network has been talking to one of these command and control servers, it will raise an alarm. So there's many different ways that you can use IP reputation. It's just mainly today. It mainly exists in its external form, and it's a way of watching for who has been communicating with these known bad addresses. The screenshot that you see here is a screenshot from StealthWatch that shows you that in this particular case there have been 24 instances of someone on your network attempting to communicate with an IRC bot in Germany. So from an external perspective, it's very good and extremely valuable. It helps prioritize what you should be concentrating on. Now, let's talk about the concern index. So what in the world is a concern index? Well, literally speaking, it's how concerned or you should be about a host on your network, and this can also apply to hosts outside your network as well. But the concern index is a value that is calculated based on behavior. So it is possible for you go into a new installation, you put the StealthWatch system in, and it starts baselining the behavior of the network. And once something deviates from that type of behavior or from the baseline, then it begins to accumulate these concern index points. And sometimes these concern index points can get really off the charts. And when something gets really off the chart, then that is something that you should be very concerned about. So hence the concern index. So a couple of different things that causes accumulation of concern index would be, as I said, deviation from a particular norm, scanning activity, communication patterns, like for example, communications with different parts of the network that that host shouldn't necessarily be communicating with. Communication with a certain outside host that may be a known bad host. Here's another one, movement of unexpectedly large amounts of data. So in the case of data exfiltration, you know, the behavior that's going on in the network is not in and of itself malicious, but it's anomalous. So if you've got somebody at 9:30 in the evening that's sending, that's using FTP to ship off 60 meg worth of data to some random location, well, again, it doesn't violate any security policy per se, but it's definitely outside the norm of what it should be doing or what it's done in the past. And then, like I said, a perfect example of strange communication patterns would be if somebody in your desktop environment was attempting repeatedly to communicate with something in the PCI environment. So these are all examples of things that would accumulate concern index points. The concern index is network-wide, mainly because of the net flow data. So routers and switches and firewalls and things of that nature can all send net flow data. And there's an amazing amount of information that can be gotten from net flow data, both from a network performance side and the security side. But because of the extensibility of NetFlow, the fact that it's pretty lightweight compared to syslog and things of that nature, it's fairly simple to enable. You send it to StealthWatch in this case for analysis, and then there's a ton of information that can be gained from just doing data analytics on the information that's provided in NetFlow. So the concern index has several different uses, not the least of which is alarming, trending, and reporting. Now, the alarming, I can't say enough about that. When a host achieves a certain amount of concern index points, it's bubbled up into one of several different dashboards, and it makes it very easy to see who these hosts are, and then you can drill in and get all kinds of additional information about who that, like for example, what is the system that is accumulating these concern index points? Is it a Windows box? Is it an Android device? What is the device that's accumulating these? You can also get the user information because StealthWatch integrates with the Cisco ISE solution. You can get this information. We also have our own identity appliance that can provide a lot of this information. And so the last thing that the concern index and certainly not least, that it allows you to do is reputation. So if, for example, you see one or several hosts that has exceeded the normal concern index by several 100%, then you can feel pretty confident that that host has a pretty bad reputation. And because we store the alarm information for extended periods of time, you can go back in time and see how many times this host has raised an alarm, how many times has it deviated from the acceptable concern limits. So the concern index, and the reason that I brought this up, the concern index is really the technology that provides you the ability to get this reputation. So let's see what I'm talking about. So in use, this is what the concern index actually looks like. So in this particular case, we have an external host from Brazil. We have one in the Russian Federation that have exceeded the concern index by 5,140% or 3,331%. And then over on the other side, you can see exactly what they were doing. They were scanning your network. So that's pretty good information for establishing some sort of reputation for a host. Now, although this refers to an external host here in this packet capture, we're going to see later how the same concept can be extended to your internal network. So let's talk about reputation. Now, you may be thinking, I already know what reputation is. You've already explained this to me ad nauseum. So what more do I have to learn? Well, we know about the external side, but the internal side is also possible. Internal host reputation is a concept that the concern index allows you to explore. We've talked about the usefulness of external IP reputation, so I don't think we need to revisit that. There's a lot of, from a security perspective, having external host reputation is without question. It's a good cornerstone of a network security practice. But on the internal side is much, much harder to do, and probably the reason that you don't see internal host reputation threat feeds is because it's in general not possible, because that would require somebody having intimate knowledge of your network. But internal host reputation, especially because internal networks are expanding in size, and some internal networks almost look like their own internet, they're so vast. So having internal host reputation, just like you do with external host reputation, is extremely beneficial and valuable, because it gives you an idea of what hosts on your network are the ones that could potentially be a problem. And you know, like I said, the reason you really haven't seen this is because of the amount of visibility that would be required from an external firm. It could be a security hazard. It would be a complicated proposition. But with StealthWatch, by virtue of the fact that all you really have to do is enable NetFlow, you get internal host reputation because you have the concern index. Now, hosts on the interior of the network are, you know, especially in larger networks where having some measure of anonymity becomes is a consideration. So hosts on the internal network do misbehave, especially when they think that the network is too vast to be noticed. But types of things that you would want to be concerned about would be data exfiltration, and like the example I referenced a little bit earlier, users hogging bandwidth. So is somebody just hammering Facebook all day long? Are they just camped out on Facebook and, you know, that type of thing? So who's using what kind of bandwidth? So we've talked about command and control servers, we've talked about the external threat feed, but one area where these two things can be married, internal host reputation and external host reputation, is when you talk about communication with a known botnet command and control server. We have a threat feed, and this threat feed provides you up-to-date information on command and control servers. So you can see which hosts on your interior network have been communicating with these command and control servers, and that, you know, this will always raise an alarm. It will always get bubbled up to the top anytime any communication like that occurs. And then one other interesting thing is attempted communications to parts of the network that this host may not be allowed to go to. Maybe they can route there, but maybe there's a firewall in between that's preventing it. But what can happen is, because in StealthWatch everything is broken down by host groups, you can set up policies to alarm you when communication from one host group to another host group occurs. And any attempted communication like that would again accumulate concern index points. So this gives you all of these different things that I've just gone through, the data exfiltration. These things would all accumulate concern index points, and it would give you an idea of, I guess the industry standard nomenclature would be bad actors on your network. So that's a little background on reputation. So internal host reputation is, you can consider it a more personal form of reputation services. External reputation, not particularly personal. It's information like that is accumulated by third parties, and all kinds of different data sets go into external IP reputation. It's not very personal. You don't have a great deal of input into what goes into that. But on the internal side, this is your network. These are your hosts. These are your users. And because the concern index is a cumulative thing, that is, I mean, it doesn't just stop once a certain threshold is reached. It continues to accumulate these concerned index points. So you can spot a problem. You can spot an issue before it really becomes a problem. So if you see a host that's accumulating index or concern index points, then you can go investigate that host and get a better idea of what's actually happening. Because of the Cisco ISE integration, as I mentioned earlier, it's also it's possible to pull the user identity information, device information, that type of thing. So you can get really actionable, really personalized information about that host if it becomes a problem. And the same goes for virtual hosts. So because the ESX environment has basically a form of NetFlow that gives all kinds of interesting information, you can get information on the virtual hosts as well. So it doesn't just extend to the physical environment, it extends to the virtual environment as well. And anything that has contributed to somebody's degrading reputation, all of that stuff can be explored. Like, for example, what we see here is a screenshot from our cyber threats dashboard. This is our most basic, easily accessible dashboard, and it provides 5 tabs. Reputation is the first one. And in the first tab, you can see who the host was, by how far they exceeded the concern index, and you can see exactly what that particular host was doing. You can also drill in. For example, you could right-click there and go to a host snapshot, and you could see who the user was that was logged into that PC at that particular time. And then additionally, it's worth mentioning the reconnaissance, data loss, malware, and botnets tabs. All of those tabs provide information about security on your network. And interestingly enough, the malware tab will actually show you how malware could potentially be spreading through your network. So just a quick summary on this slide. Reputation, internal host reputation is very personal. It's leveraged through the concern index and gives you much richer information than external host reputation does. Now, external host reputation is by its very nature limited in what it can provide you. The external and the internal host reputation are meant to complement one another, and I think together it's a very powerful security story. So tying it all together, so the concern index, as I mentioned, is a measure of how out of bounds a host on your network has gone. The more a concern index, the more concern index points accumulate, the more concerned you should be about it. So, as I said, it doesn't just reach a threshold and then stop calculating these values. It continually calculates them so you can see which ones are really becoming problematic. Now, we have dashboards. Now, as I briefly mentioned a minute ago, we organize, the interface organizes information into host groups. So you could have, say, for example, inside hosts and outside hosts. And under inside hosts, you could have it broken down by network function, my PCI host group, my web servers, so on and so forth. You can run dashboards on each one of those host groups. So you don't necessarily have to start at the very top and see the entire network. If you've got a huge network, that's a lot of information. But you can run a report, basically a host group dashboard, that allows you to see on a host group by host group basis which types of, or which hosts you should be most concerned about. And when you run a host snapshot, this gives you an idea of its reputation. And like I said a minute ago, historically you can go back and see exactly how this host has been behaving. I mean, maybe when you start your investigation, you find that this particular host just had to, I don't know, upload something to a website, which caused the system to alarm. But what you may find is that this is a PC on the network for which there is no information. It's something you don't know about, and it's actually shipping data off. Like a couple of practical examples here. I don't know if any of you guys read about the New York Times hack here recently. The New York Times hack was interesting because there was no real financial gain or anything of that nature involved, but what it was that you had hosts that were coming from different locations around the world into the New York Times network. They successfully penetrated the network, and they were just moving around all over the different systems on the New York Times network because they were looking for information related to a particular story. So those types of things you might be able to spot depending on exactly how you had your network organized in StealthWatch, because hosts were behaving in ways that they wouldn't normally behave. They were visiting areas of the network that they may not, that there's no good reason why they should have visited that area of the network. These are the types of things that you can spot. Are they doing anything malicious? No. Are they, is there any malware involved? No. Those types of things are things with the concern index that you might be able to spot, the things that cannot be easily categorized or referenced. So that is a nice segue into how do we use all of this for combating cyber threats. So perimeter defenses, the perimeter defenses are the, I guess you might say, the ramparts. They are they do some of the heavy lifting. They do pattern matching, next generation firewalls, IPS, all these different technologies that are deployed at the perimeter, anything that's signature based. They definitely have their place. They get rid of a lot of the low hanging fruit. But where they are somewhat lacking is in the phishing department, social engineering, well-engineered email attachments, for example, things that even the code that they carry is somewhat obfuscated. All of these types of things, and worse, the most insidious threat, of course, is insiders. Insiders, they don't get a lot of press, but insiders are terrible, and there are two types of insiders. There's the malicious insider, and then there's what I call I'm trying to think of a non-derogatory term for it, but then there are the insiders that don't know any better, who bring in an infected USB stick. They go home, they surf the internet for 3 or 4 hours, and their laptop becomes infected with something else. They bring it into the network, and viola, you've got some sort of nastiness on your network. So these are the types of things that perimeter defenses aren't all that awesome at taking care of. So the end result of all of those things that I just talked about, phishing, social engineering, email attachments, insiders, the end result is essentially the same. It is going to cause some change in the behavior of that endpoint. Now, that endpoint may start moving around the network. That endpoint may start scanning things. That endpoint may attempt to communicate with parts of the network that it has no business communicating with, for example. All of these different scenarios can unfold once something has been compromised. Now, in a similar way, because what you're looking at is a deviation from a particular baseline, a change in behavior, you can also track worm propagation. In fact, we have a tool that is designed to track worm propagation. All of these things, let's say you've got an insider, all of these things start to accumulate concern index points. If an insider brings in his laptop and the minute that cable goes into the side of the computer, something hits the network, all of these things, it starts to accumulate concern index points, depending on exactly what it is and how it's behaving. And then anything that is behaving particularly badly, something that is just off the charts, like, for example, a botnet. If somebody is at home, they're visiting a website of ill repute, and they get some sort of nastiness on their computer, and they bring it in, and the minute they plug it in, it starts talking to a command and control server. Bam! That's a change in behavior that's going to immediately be identified, and it's going to immediately pop up on the cyber threats dashboard. And it will pop up under the reputation section so that you can see pretty quickly that you have a host with a bad reputation on your network. Then you can drill in, see how many times this particular host has done something, and get an idea of how bad its reputation really is. Is this a one-off event, or is this a continual pattern of bad behavior? Now, another thing, like I just kind of briefly touched on with the worm tracker, if there's any sort of internal pivoting that occurs, so if somebody gets infected and then they start pivoting around the network to compromise other hosts, all of that type of thing is clearly visible. One thing that's very important to note is that cyber criminals, particularly the most determined cyber criminals, you're not really battling a piece of malware. What you're actually battling is a sophisticated behavior. You take some of the Chinese hacking that's gone on here recently. Getting past perimeter defenses seems to be no issue. That seems to be more or less easy to do. How they're doing it, it's a matter of some debate, but what you're actually battling is a sophisticated behavior. Once they've compromised the network, particularly in the case of the New York Times, they're moving all over the place. And in order to combat a sophisticated behavior, it sort of requires a behavioral approach to it. And the behavioral approach is data analytics. So you've got all of this amazing data that NetFlow spits out. It gives you the ability to measure the health and wellness of a network. It gives you the ability to get security telemetry on a network. All of these awesome things that NetFlow allows you to do, but it's the underlying analytics engine, the behavioral component, that actually makes the data valuable. That's what gives you the concern index, and the concern index is what gives you the internal host reputation. All right, so now I've talked a pretty good bit about I've referenced the cyber threats dashboard on a couple of instances here, and I wanted you guys to be able to see a screenshot of what it looks like. Now, from where I'm sitting, this screenshot looks small. At least I hope from where you're sitting it's somewhat visible, but at least on the upper left-hand side, what you're looking at is the reputation tab. So that's what you've got. You've got a list of IP addresses, you have their associated concern indices, and then on the far right-hand column, then you can see exactly what the behaviors were that led to them being on the reputation tab. But in addition to the reputation tab, there's also the reconnaissance tab, there's the data loss, there's the malware, and the botnet tabs. So if you're just sitting down, if you're coming in and you think, oh Lord, this security thing, I am just so totally overwhelmed, where do I begin? You begin with the Cyber Threats Dashboard. It's a good place to start. And right from there, right from that view that you see right there, you can right-click on that IP address, check out the host snapshot, you can get user information, you can get all kinds of good stuff that allows you to go through and see exactly what this host has been up to, and have they been misbehaving in the past, because that's a very, very relevant question. Like I said, it could be one-off, but it's when there's a history of misbehavior that one begins to wonder. So conclusions. Let's talk about conclusions. What have we learned here today? Well, and I briefly referenced this at the beginning of this, is that internal networks, as they continue to grow, I think that having some measure of internal reputation becomes as important as having some measure of external reputation. Not all organizations have giant internal networks, but many do. And so, like I said, sometimes these internal networks are so vast in size that rarely are external services needed. Sometimes there are even internal social networking sites and chat and all of these amazing things. So as time goes along, I think that internal host reputation is going to become even more valuable because it gives you an idea of where to start, where to dig in, who on your network is of the biggest concern. And, you know, there are things that you can do, too, configurable things that you can do that will generate concern index points. If somebody's using up too much, if there's too much application usage going on, for example. Now, perimeter devices, this is everything we've covered. This is not the type of information that they're designed to provide. I worked in the perimeter security industry for quite a while, and they have their place. But once you're talking about the internal side of things, once you're inside the network, then it's kind of a different ball of wax. So using NetFlow and collecting telemetry from all of the different devices you have on your network, I think it's a great idea. You've got these devices on your network that can speak NetFlow. They're capable of providing security telemetry. Enable it. Use it. Get a solution in there that can help bowl this stuff up to the top and can perform data analytics and behavioral analysis of your network. It makes good sense. Advanced cyber threats, one thing that's important to note about advanced cyber threats is that they are not something that can be easily categorized or referenced. In the good old days, way back in say '01 and '02 and '03 and those years through there, I would say that the internet was it was easier to secure. Most of the time, what you read about was external threats. You read about viruses and malware and all that type of thing, and stopping that stuff with perimeter defenses was easy. But advanced cyber threats, no, they're not easy. We have read about some fabulously complicated attacks over the course of the last couple of years, I would say, and you know, the people, nation states and people who have great financial motivation, they're not stupid. These are extremely smart people, and they know that using the traditional methods of network compromise, it's not going to work. So a lot of the attacks that you see these days are, of course, much more difficult to spot. And because they're much more difficult to spot, they go undetected for a long period of time, and the amount of damage that they do can potentially be catastrophic. Fortunately, the concern index and internal host reputation is a very, very valuable tool in combating these types of threats. One thing I'd like to call your attention to, there's a link here that provides some pretty good information. It's kind of a sobering overview of the landscape of advanced threats today. I was doing the research and preparation for this. I was reading it, and there's some very, very good information in there. It's not too in depth, but it's good stuff. Give you an idea of what we're up against these days. But the concern index and internal host reputation, these are tools that help color in the gray area for you. The things that cannot be easily categorized or referenced require sort of a behavioral and analytical approach to classification. So now, a couple of last things I want to say before I conclude here. We will be at RSA this year, 2013, and do not forget about the famous Lancope Ninja Sword. If you have ever wanted to give a child a gift that will annoy you endlessly, I highly recommend the Ninja Sword, and plus it's just really cool. So visit us at booth 1653. We've got a couple of really good presentations. Tom Cross, for those of you who have not joined us in a while for a webinar, Tom Cross is our Director of Security Research, and he is going to be on Tuesday and Wednesday giving some talks, one at 4:30 p.m. and one at 2:30 p.m. on Wednesday. And if you have any questions, you can email sales@lancope.com if you'd like to see a demo or anything of that nature. And also, there's this. Now, when we provide you guys with the copy of all these slides, then you'll be able to scan these QR codes. But yes, that's right. We are all over the social media. So if you want to visit us at any of these places, or if you would like to download a copy of the NetFlow Security for Dummies, it is available for download. And our security research at RSA, we're going to be talking a lot about this. Check out the new threat feed that we've got, the Stealth Watch Labs Intelligence Center, or as we like to call it, SLIC. So anyway, I want to thank you all.